Well, in a couple of weeks, there will be some big United Nations conferences. As you know, we're sending our own Sheila Gunn-Reid to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That is the global warming conference, and it's being held this year in Poland. That'll be Sheila's third trip there. Of course, the UN doesn't want us to come in, and we haven't announced it publicly yet, but I'm giving you a sneak preview of it. We will be sending our own David Menzies to another United Nations conference just a couple of days earlier than that in Marrakesh, Morocco. It's called the UN Global Compact for Migration, and it's just what it sounds like. It is a global warming treaty, but instead of a global warming, it's an international pact about migration. And joining us now to talk about it is our favorite immigration expert himself. Giddy Mammon is a lawyer with Mammon Sandalwood Kingwell LLP. Giddy, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I just finished reading the entire document. It's a very long document, hundreds of paragraphs, dozens of objectives. It's an enormous document that contemplates setting up new bureaucracies and new standards and new funding. I think would you agree with me, Giddy, that the purpose of this, I'm not going to call it a treaty because it's not quite a treaty, but the purpose of this document is to normalize mass migration?
I think that would be fair. Basically, these countries are getting together and agreeing to be nice to migrants, to provide them access to schooling, access to work, access to health care, etc. So the implications are huge for most nation states. And there's lots and lots of questions as to really what are we getting ourselves into.
You know, the word rights, as in a human right, a civil right, I have it on my screen as we're talking here, Giddy. The word right appears 112 times in this document. I don't think they come right out and say a foreign national has a right to come into your country, but they say it in 112 other indirect ways. Is it, again, I'm just speculating here, I'm just trying to come to grips with this. I sense that the purpose of this document is to infuse courts, politicians, tribunals in all UN countries to start treating this as a right, and that this document, although not a binding treaty, will take on that effect in practice. As a theory, you're the first guy I'm bouncing this off, Giddy, because I just finished reading the document myself.
Well, you're right. Today, as I was going over this with a couple of our more experienced lawyers in the office, we're trying to wrestle with this concept of a compact, not a treaty, non-binding. Are we getting ourselves into any obligation that we may be sorry for later? Is this going to create, if not rules requiring us to do something, but norms that we now need to establish as standards in Canada? What's also interesting is, for example, the interplay between this compact and our own Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, because that act is very clear. It says that we need to interpret this act in a way that complies with international human rights instruments to which Canada is a signatory. So is this a human rights instrument? We're expected to honor our obligations, and Canadians, I think, are pretty good at doing that. Are all the other countries who are going to be signing on to this, are they going to be doing the same? And if they don't, will that create a pathway to Canada, because other pathways are only paying lip service to these so-called obligations? There's a lot of stuff that we really are having trouble wrapping our heads around in terms of this compact.
Yeah. While we were talking, I was typing in a search field in this document some of the things you're mentioning. I mentioned the word rights appears 112 times. The word democracy is not in there. They don't really regard that as an issue. It's being the UN. The word racism is in there 10 times. Can I read you one section here, and I know I'm catching you a little bit off guard, but let me read this to you in full, because it's not just immigration, it's the politics around immigration that this is trying to shape. And let me read to you what they talk about the media, because that's of interest to me. The word media shows up 6 times, 4 of them in this paragraph. Okay, so this is an action that is agreed to. I'm just going to read it to you, Giddy, and let me know what you think of it. Promote independent, objective, and quality reporting of media outlets, including internet-based information, including by sensitizing and educating media professionals on migration-related issues and terminology, investing in ethical reporting standards and advertising, and stopping allocation of public funding or material support to media outlets that systematically promote, and in their words, intolerance, xenophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination towards migrants. And then they laughably tack on, in full respect to the freedom of the media. That's a lot of stuff. It's got nothing to do with actual immigration, a lot to do with shaping what you're allowed to say and not.
It's hard to fathom where this idea is coming from. Progressive societies believe in free speech and are loath to infringe in any way on that. Presumably, they believe they have a good product. The idea of migrants entering countries, seeking help. It sounds very odd to me that they're sort of promoting a groupthink on this and telling democratic countries, basically, we want you to shape public opinion in one way or the other, and we don't want you to support in any way any kind of opinion that goes against what we're trying to accomplish here. Yeah. That's not something that I've seen before, to be perfectly honest. It almost gives me reason to worry that this plan cannot withstand open dialogue and open criticism.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if it's a great policy, it ought to sell itself. What concerns me is the labeling of dissent intolerant. They've assumed that criticism is, of course, based on intolerance, as opposed to, I think, we have a chart we show from time to time, Giddy. I'm sure you know the one. It's an Angus Reid poll that came out in August, and it showed that the greatest number of Canadians opposed to our immigration levels ever recorded. 49% want the number lower. The smallest number recorded want it higher, 6%. And only 31% like it where it is. So if you take out those folks who say it's just right, 49% said we want less immigration, 6% say we want more immigration. Those numbers, that's, I don't believe that half of Canadians are intolerant. I think people think our system's broken, and you're going to force feed a mass migration policy on them from the UN. That's a recipe for trouble like we see in places like Germany. That's my opinion, Giddy, but I'm a little revved up on this. You're a cool, calm, collected guy. You spent your life as an immigration and refugee lawyer. What do you think?
No one's ever going to persuade me that Canadians are not nice people and that we're not generous. We are a very generous and a very nice bunch of people. There's no question about it. All I can say, Ezra, is this is inevitable. Canadians are proud of who they are and they're proud of their country. And when they see people flowing daily across a ditch to enter the country, not through a proper port of entry, automatically being met with no resistance, being facilitated in every way with free accommodation, social assistance, medical care. They sometimes do and they sometimes don't appear like they are fleeing persecution because, after all, they're coming from the United States, which is a democracy very similar to ours. You're going to lose people. You're going to lose the support of Canadians, and that's what's happening. And the reason that I'm concerned about it is because there are real refugees around, and we have to have a society that remains compassionate and tolerant and willing to receive these people and willing to undertake expenses to look after them. If we continue on this path, we're going to lose those people, and that is going to cause great dangers to genuine refugees. And quite frankly, the timing of this compact, in my opinion, couldn't be worse. When countries all around the world are feeling overwhelmed by the number of refugees that they have to consider, and refugees are a very small group compared to migrants. Right. There may be 10, 20 million refugees around the world. We're talking about numbers here of 250 million known migrants around the world. And if we're going to start taking on obligations towards them also, then essentially our borders are open for anyone who wants to come, because there is no definition to a migrant. Anybody who appears at your doorstep, as far as I know, qualifies as a migrant. And I think that that's inconsistent with what Canadians think ought to be happening at their border. I think Canadians still want some control at their border.
Yeah. I want to read just one line. It's only about 10 words. And this document is so long. There's so much in it. And a lot of it's written in sort of buzzwords and bureaucratic, dense language that, jargon. But let me read to you 10 words that could not be clearer. Ready? This is from the document, and I encourage people, you can find it in a second on Google. Here's the sentence, Giddy. Countries have to, quote, facilitate access to procedures for family reunification for migrants at all skills levels. So if I'm translating into plain English, and again, who knows what this document will be interpreted as, anyone who comes here, refugee, immigrant, asylum seeker, any migrant, anyone who comes here, we have to make it easy for them to bring any family over here, no matter what their skill level, language, education. That would transform our immigration policy into something meaningless, in my view. But again, I'm coming at this apoplectic to begin with. Give me a reality check here. I just read it verbatim to you, Giddy. What do you think of it?
When I was reading this document, there were no number of places that I didn't have to stop and think, what are the implications of this statement? The one that you are raising is just one sentence out of hundreds in this document, and a lot of them are extraordinarily thought-provoking, if not controversial and revolutionary in terms of how we see ourselves as nation states. The truth is, and I have no hesitation saying this, in spite of over 30 years of practice in this field, I have no idea what the implications are of this particular document, because it is not precise language like we find in our criminal code and in our Immigration Refugee Protection Act. These are big concepts and big words meaning big things. And you're right. If this has any traction, and I assume that it ought to have some traction if Canada's going to send someone to Marrakesh in a couple of weeks to put Canada's seal on this thing, I have no idea what it's going to look like after that. When people show up at our doors, what do we do? Do we let everybody in? Do we provide everybody with social assistance? Do we provide everybody with medical care? How long do they get to stay here?
Yeah.
How do we get rid of them? Do we get rid of them, or are we obligated to bring their families over? So if we're doing that, then it doesn't make sense anymore that we're getting rid of them, because, I don't see that this is a temporary sojourn in Canada. It looks like if you're bringing your family from abroad, you're going to be here for a while. Yeah. What's a while? I have no idea.
I just want to read one more line to you. And there, as you say, there are 100 lines I could. But I just want to give you one specific command that is in here, and it's really a feast of these. This is another task for countries. Incorporate the health needs of migrants in national and local healthcare policies and plans. such as by strengthening capacities for service provision, facilitating affordable and non-discriminatory access, reducing communication barriers, and training healthcare providers on culturally sensitive service delivery. Oh, just that. I mean, forget about hospital waiting lists, just forget about hospitals. And for every possible manifestation of government, like I say, the word rights appears over 100 times here. Giddy, I want to let you know we're sending a team of reporters there. I doubt the UN will let us in the actual conference, but we're going to give it a good look. We're crowdfunding it. People could go to rebelun.com if they want to chip in. Let me ask you for some advice. If you had one question that you would like our reporter, David Menzies, to put to any expert who would be willing to talk to us, and I don't even know if they would, what question, what genuine who, what, where, why, when kind of question would you put to a UN official to try and figure out what this means?
I would ask them, does this compact take precedence over our own immigration laws and domestic laws? We have laws dealing with eligibility for health care. For example, in Ontario, we have the OHIP plan, which says that you're eligible in 3 months after arriving here as a permanent resident. Does that mean this supplants that? We're entitled to deport people who are not legally in Canada. Does this mean we can't deport them anymore? So I don't really understand which one sits on top of which.
Yeah.
And I doubt that you're going to get an answer to that because this has an impact on just about every single law that we know, never mind the immigration. I mean, how do I now, if I have somebody who's illegally here in Canada, let's call him a migrant under this compact. He's here without status. I have this obligation to reunite him with his wife and his children in Canada. And I have a Canadian citizen who wants to sponsor his parents from overseas. And it's taking a few years to do that. And he has to meet all kinds of financial criteria and health criteria, et cetera. Well, that doesn't sound consistent. How could it be that migrants with no status in Canada have the ability to be reunited with their family in Canada, but Canadian citizens don't have that automatic right? There's just so many things that are going in my mind about this thing. It's impossible for me to wrap my head around some of these issues. And quite frankly, just on that basis, I would never sign such a document. Not that I don't believe that we should be nice to people, regardless of whether they have status or not, but I think that that's something that we need to decide on our own. I think Canadians know how to be nice to people. If somebody's sick, we know how to make sure that they get medical care right away. But this regime, honestly, Ezra, I'm baffled by what they're proposing.
Yeah, well, it is baffling, and maybe deliberately so. I should say that the United States, Italy, Hungary, Austria, and several other countries have said they will not sign it. I think Italy just made that announcement in the last 48 hours or so.
That's right.
Canada seems dead set on signing it. Giddy, there's so much to talk about. I presume that this will not be, the conference is in a couple of weeks in Morocco, but we will be talking about this for many more months. I'm so grateful to you for your expertise. Thanks for giving us some thoughts in advance of this convention.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a great pleasure and an education. That's our friend Giddy Mammon, who, of course, for his whole career has been a lawyer on behalf of immigrants and migrants. He gives us his assessment. As I mentioned a couple of times, our friend David Menzies will be going to Morocco with a videographer to capture what we can from this convention. It wouldn't surprise me if the United Nations tries their best to keep us out, but we'll still report on it, I believe, more skeptically and more critically than even the mainstream media journalists who would be allowed inside the chamber. If you want to help crowdfund the ticket for David and our videographer to go to Morocco, we could use your help. Please go to rebelun.com, and that's also where all of David's reports will be published. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show, weekdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Every day I do a monologue, interview a guest, and read my fan mail and my hate mail. To subscribe, go to therebel.media/shows.